They sat across the table, laughing at my $500,000 offer as if it were a joke. They treated me like an unwanted outsider who was trying to buy her way into their precious family legacy. But what my parents and brother didn't realize was that their company was already gasping for air, and I wasn't offering them charity, I was giving them their final lifeline. The second I sent one quiet text message to my investment manager, their countdown to complete collapse began. My name is Rachel Baker. I am 31 years old, the managing director of Vanguard Equity Holdings, and for my entire life I was considered the black sheep of the Baker family. 10 years ago, when I chose to pursue corporate finance instead of working for my father's regional manufacturing business, Baker Enterprises, my parents practically wrote me off. My father, Harold, believed in traditional family legacy, which meant everything was supposed to pass down to his golden boy, my younger brother Mark. Mark was lazy, arrogant, and had dropped out of 2 business programs, but Harold handed him the vice president title anyway. Meanwhile, I worked 80-hour weeks climbing the ladder in Manhattan, building a multi-million-dollar private equity fund entirely on my own. Tonight, my parents had called a mandatory family dinner at their estate. I knew why before I even stepped through the door. Baker Enterprises was in deep financial trouble. Their supply chain was collapsing, their key bank loans were past due, and payroll was 3 weeks away from bouncing. I sat in the formal dining room, watching my mother, Eleanor, pour wine, while my brother Mark sat across from me twirling his car keys on his finger. My father stood at the head of the table, puffing up his chest with fake confidence. "I called you here to make sure you understood where this family stands, Rachel," Harold began, his voice condescending. "We know you've made a little money in city finance, but this family business is real work. We don't operate on paper numbers." I placed my hands calmly on the table. "Dad, I know Baker Enterprises lost 4 major vendor accounts last quarter. I know your primary credit line of $12 million is due this Friday, and you don't have the liquid cash to cover the interest payment." Mark let out a loud, mocking snort. "Oh, listen to the big city analyst. We have things completely under control, Rachel. Don't act like you know how to run our company. I am offering to personally inject $500,000 in equity right now," I said, keeping my tone completely level. "In exchange, I want a 30% equity share, a seat on the board, and a full operational audit of Mark's department." The room went completely silent for 2 seconds before Harold burst out laughing. It wasn't polite laughter, it was loud, arrogant, and vicious. "We don't need your $500,000, Rachel." Harold laughed, shaking his head. "You think you can just come in here with your city money and buy control over my life's work? This is our company. Mark and I built this." Eleanor smirked, crossing her arms as she looked down at me. "Your father is right, Rachel. You're being remarkably arrogant. We don't need your help. We have a major institutional investor finalizing a restructuring deal at our emergency board meeting tonight." "Is that right?" I asked softly, a cold smile touching my lips. "That's right," Mark bragged, leaning over the table. "Vanguard Equity Holdings is stepping in to back our debt. They're extending our credit lines and putting up $12 million to clear our default. The managing director of Vanguard is personally attending our emergency board meeting in 10 minutes to sign the papers. So take your little $500,000 offer and run back to Manhattan." I looked at my brother. I looked at my father's smug face. They were so blinded by their pride and their hatred of my independence that they hadn't even checked the official registration of the firm restructuring their debt. I quietly pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. Underneath the table, out of their view, I typed a single message to my senior risk manager. "Rachel, withdraw all backing from Baker Enterprise loan portfolio immediately. Cancel credit extension. Asterisk." I hit send. Sent 7:05 p.m. asterisk. My phone vibrated almost instantly with a reply. Asterisk done, Managing Director Baker. Liquidation proceedings initialized. Asterisk. I slid my phone back into my pocket, stood up, and smoothed down my tailored suit jacket. "Where are you going?" Eleanor asked, her tone sharp. We're not finished talking about your attitude. I have a meeting to attend, I said smoothly. And if I were you, I would check your company email. Right on cue, Harold's phone on the dining table began to ring frantically. Simultaneously, Mark's tablet flashed with 20 automated system alerts. Harold picked up his phone, his face relaxing into a fake smile. Ah, that must be our primary lender. He stopped. The smile vanished from his face as he listened to the voice on the line. His skin turned a sickly shade of gray, his jaw dropping open in sheer terror. What do you mean canceled? Harold screamed into the receiver, his voice cracking violently. Vanguard withdrew the loan extension. That's impossible. The meeting starts in 10 minutes. Mark was staring at his tablet in absolute panic, his hand shaking so hard he almost dropped it. Dad, the bank just flagged our corporate accounts. They've frozen all operational withdrawals. Vanguard pulled the backing. Eleanor gasped, standing up and grabbing Harold's arm. Harold, what's happening? What about the board meeting? Harold dropped his phone onto the carpet. He looked at Mark, his eyes filled with pure panic. The emergency board meeting, the board members are already in the conference room downstairs. We're ruined. Without Vanguard, we default tonight. They scrambled past me, knocking over chairs in their desperate rush to get down to the ground floor corporate conference room. They didn't even look back at me as they sprinted down the hallway. I walked slowly out of the dining room, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. I adjusted my watch, taking a deep, calm breath as I followed them at an unhurried pace. Their emergency board meeting started in 10 minutes. And they were about to find out who Vanguard's managing director really was. The heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open, and Harold, Mark, and Eleanor burst into the room in a state of sheer panic. The 6 independent board members were already seated around the long oval table, whispering nervously as they scanned emergency notifications on their laptops. What is going on here? Harold shouted, wiping sweat from his forehead as he slammed his hands on the table. I just got word that Vanguard Equity canceled our credit extension. Who authorized this update right before our signing? The lead board member, a gray-haired gentleman named Arthur Vance, looked up with a solemn expression. Vanguard didn't just cancel the credit extension, Harold. They issued an immediate notice of loan default. Under the terms of the bailout contract your son signed 3 months ago, Vanguard exercised its right to convert defaulted debt into majority voting shares. Mark's face went entirely white. Wait, what are you talking about? We own 51% of the family shares. You can't outvote us. You owned 51% until 4:30 this afternoon, Arthur corrected cold-faced. When your secondary supplier notes defaulted today, Vanguard seized your pledged equity. Vanguard Equity Holdings now controls 65% of the voting power in Baker Enterprises. They literally own this company. No. This is a mistake, Eleanor shrieked, clutching her handbag to her chest. We are supposed to meet with Vanguard's managing director right now. Where are they? We will fix this. That exact moment, the double doors at the back of the conference room clicked open. I stepped into the room. I wasn't rushing. I carried my dark leather briefcase in one hand and my iPad in the other. The entire room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Harold blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Rachel! Harold snapped, his tone laced with exasperation. What are you doing in here? We are in the middle of a corporate crisis. Get out. Yeah, Rachel, leave. Mark yelled, trying to reclaim his authority in front of the board. This is an emergency meeting for high-level executives. Go wait in the hallway. I ignored them completely. I walked straight down the center of the room, past my trembling brother and pale father, and pulled out the large leather armchair at the head of the boardroom table, the seat traditionally reserved for the majority owner. I sat down calmly, crossing one leg over the other, resting my hands on the glass surface. Rachel, get out of my chair, Harold roared, his face turning bright red with anger. "Are you out of your mind?" Arthur Vance stood up, looking at Harold with deep pity. "Sit down, Harold." "What?" Harold demanded. "Sit down," Arthur repeated firmly. "Rachel isn't here as your daughter. She is here as the managing director and chief investment officer of Vanguard Equity Holdings." The silence that followed was terrifying. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she stumbled back against the wall. Mark froze, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he looked at me, then at the Vanguard corporate seal stamped on the digital screen behind my head. "You?" Harold stammered, his voice dropping to a hollow whisper. "You're Vanguard." "I am Vanguard," I said, my voice smooth, cold, and entirely void of warmth. "For the last 3 years, I have personally overseen Vanguard's commercial portfolio. When Mark quietly reached out to our firm 6 months ago desperate to hide your inventory losses, I authorized a private credit line to keep your doors open." I turned my head and looked directly at Mark, whose knees were visibly shaking. "I gave your leadership a chance," I continued, opening my iPad. "And how did you use that money, Mark? You authorized a $300,000 bonus for yourself. You leased a luxury sports car on the corporate account. And you falsified quarterly revenue reports to hide the fact that your department lost our 3 biggest accounts." Mark's mouth worked silently, but no sound came out. Sweat was pouring down his neck, soaking his shirt collar. "Rachel, sweetheart," Eleanor stammered, taking a hesitant step toward the table with a fake, trembling smile. We didn't know. If we had known Vanguard was yours, we never would have talked to you like that at dinner. We are family. You wouldn't destroy your father's legacy, would you?" I looked at my mother with complete detachment. 20 minutes ago at the dinner table, Dad told me that family meant nothing in business, I stated clearly. He told me my $500,000 offer was garbage. He laughed in my face and told me to take my money and run back to Manhattan. So I took my money. I leaned forward, looking into my father's broken, aged eyes. "As the majority shareholder controlling 65% of voting stock, I am executing an immediate corporate restructuring," I announced to the room. I looked at the board members, who nodded in silent agreement. "First, Mark Baker is relieved of his duties as Vice President of Operations, effective immediately," I stated firmly. "His corporate access is revoked, and Vanguard's forensic team will be reviewing his expense accounts for criminal embezzlement." Mark buried his face in his hands, collapsing into an empty chair behind him, sobbing quietly. "Second," I continued, "Harold Baker is removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer. He will retain a non-voting advisory role with 0 managerial authority and no access to company funds." Harold looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. "Rachel, please, this company is my entire life. Don't take it away from me." "You threw it away yourself, Dad," I replied softly. "You sacrificed this company the moment you put your pride and blind favoritism above competence and truth. You wanted Mark to run this legacy. Well, this is where his leadership brought you." I stood up, holding my leather briefcase by my side. "Starting tomorrow at 8 in the morning, an independent management team hired by Vanguard will take over operations," I said, looking around the table at the board members. "We will save the vendor contracts, we will protect the factory workers' jobs, and we will turn this business into a professional enterprise. But the family free ride is over." I walked toward the double doors, pausing right beside my father, who stood broken and silent near the exit. "You told me at dinner that work in the real world builds character," I whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Now you finally get the chance to build yours." I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the bright, clean hallway. I walked down the corridor with steady, confident steps, leaving the ruined remains of their arrogance behind me. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the daughter looking for their approval. I was the master of my own destiny. Before we wrap up, I want to share a quick personal lesson from today's story. the end of the day, this situation teaches us something very important about competence, pride, and the danger of blind favoritism. True success is never built on arrogance or entitlement. It is earned through discipline, hard work, and emotional maturity. When people choose pride over truth and favor unearned privilege over genuine effort, they inevitably invite their own downfall. Rachel's journey reminds us that keeping your composure, knowing your true worth, and mastering your field will always speak louder than empty threats. Never let anyone belittle your achievements, because when you build your life on a foundation of integrity and knowledge, time and justice will always prove you right.